Welcome to Roundhill Radio. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, look for moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we talk about when we talk about faith. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Leslie, on this amazing weathery morning.
I heard the term bomb cyclone.
Oh, of course you did.
Of course I did. I will say from what it sounded like here in our house, we're kind of like up on a bit of a mountain side. Believable.
Okay.
Believable. So I appreciate the opportunity to record remotely today.
Yes. No need to get out on the roads.
I got a list from the town of Reading as to all of the roads blocked, and it was...
I thought that would be the case.
Quite a list.
Yeah.
So
Yes, indeed.
To the movies.
Yeah.
So yesterday was our family children's annual Christmas pageant.
Yes.
Which was adorable, as you might expect. I thought it went very smoothly. I thought they all did so well. The kids were great.
Beautifully done. Yeah. The pageant is that's a huge tradition in so many churches,
Right.
to have that opportunity. So yeah, it was beautifully done in every way. Absolutely.
It was fun because my spouse and kid were in it this year for the first time ever, and Gus was trading texts with our friends, and they live in Philadelphia, and he was also in the pageant, also a shepherd, so they were like comparing notes on how to be the best shepherds they could be for their respective churches. It was very sweet.
Oh, that's
getting
great.
the whole family involved in these things. It was fun to see all families coming together in the big church, in-person church family coming together. So that was really fun.
Yeah. And I think traditions like that they're like rungs on a ladder. We sort of go from tradition to tradition to bring ourselves to a different perspective and hopefully a place of stronger community as well. So that was really in evidence yesterday.
Absolutely. So you wanted to bring some of that into our conversation today?
I do, yes. I was thinking yesterday at the outset of the pageant that at its most basic level, the purpose of the pageant is to tell the Christmas story. And of course, to tell it as engagingly and creatively and humorously as possible. But it just struck me yesterday that this story has been told for over 2,000 years now. And we take traditions like a Christmas pageant to help us tell it, right? To kind of remember it from year to year. But it's such a remarkable story when you think about it, that 2,000 years ago, Rome was an empire that stretched across thousands and thousands of miles and engulfed so much of the civilized world at the time. And the little section, the little region of the world where Jesus and Joseph and Mary lived and was such a tiny part of that. It was kind of at the back edge of the Roman Empire. Not unimportant to the empire, but, still way away from the nerve center. And yet here this extraordinary story emerges from the edges. And I think there's something so powerful about that. And if we're feeling, kind of on the edge of things and not able to make change, not feeling very central to things, this is a good story to tell and a good story to remember. And so after the pageant, I was reminded of a book called Stories of God by a man named John Shea. He's a Roman Catholic theologian and writer. I've really enjoyed his books. He's a storyteller. And one of his books, he actually has a quotation as the front cover of the book, which is rare.
Yeah, that's a cool move.
Right? And he says on the front cover, the book, by the way, is called Stories of God, an Unauthorized Biography. So he's modest about his aspirations here, but still shooting high. So he says, when we reach our limits, when our ordered worlds collapse, this may sound familiar to many of us these days, when we cannot enact our moral ideals, when we are disenchanted, we often enter into the awareness of mystery And I thought that was an interesting thing to say, because I thought what he would say after all of that is that we can feel really blue, after we can't do this, we can't do that. Instead, he says, we enter into the awareness of mystery. We are inescapably related to this mystery, which is immanent and transcendent, right? So it's near us and it's beyond us, which issues invitations we must respond to. I love that. Which is ambiguous about its intentions, so you got to figure it out, and which is real and important beyond all else. So there's a lot going on in that little passage, right?
And that's the cover of the book?
And that is the cover of the book. And he says, there's one other line. He says, at these times when we feel like this, we gather together and tell stories of God to calm our terror and hold our hope on high.
Wow.
And as I was sitting in the sanctuary, one of the nice things about the Christmas pageant from my perspective is I could just absorb it. I don't have to do anything.
Is that you're not in it?
I'm not in it, mercifully for everybody. I listen to the story, and I think this is a story that is designed to calm our terror and hold our hope on high. It's a story about God at work in the tiniest possible way in human life, bringing helping to create this environment where a new life is going to be born. And then this child's parents have to take responsibility. Joseph becomes an adoptive father. Mary is the mother. And, before Jesus has even had a chance to really get fully formed in the world, they have to whisk him away because he's in danger. And we have inherited this story. And what in the world does it? There's so much mystery to it. There's the story of God who's at work within it. That's the immanent part. And then there's the story of God working kind of above it. That's the transcendent part. And I think at this time when I hear people express concerns about the future, and I do hear that, people say, I'm worried about the future, I'm fearful about the future, it's a time to break out the stories.
That's so interesting because, on the one hand, the story of the birth of Jesus, I feel like as children we're taught, and this is very like, everything's sweet, and they're like, oh, there's a lamb, and there's a donkey,
the lovely hay.
The hay. And now, as I feel like a lot of conversation we have, like, well, now as a mom,
different perspective.
Have some added perspective. Don't get me started on the little drummer boy, because he is not welcome.
We won't do that.
But this idea that it's like, it is this precious, earth-shattering for the world, but earth-shattering for Mary. And then everything she, the birth of Jesus is, as a human body, there's a human element there. And what this happened last year at Christmas too, like thinking of what it was like for Mary, this young woman, and then all of the like recovery of giving birth, and then trying to like have to flee with this new baby, and she's trying to figure out like how to be a mom to this like baby who's also deity. Like, what?
Right. Yeah.
I can't imagine, like this idea of the way you think your life is going to go, and then like hard turn.
No kidding.
And that she in the welcoming of Jesus, there's also, she is so relatable in that element, and we can find so much of ourselves in that element. And also the same thing with Joseph, like he thought everything was fine, he had this beautiful new wife he was going to have, this new family he was going to have, and like, nope. Right. Turning off all the expectations because there's a higher calling for their lives. It's wild to think of the tumult that they were riding. Basically, it feels like they were kind of along for the ride, it felt like.
Yeah. I think earth shattering is something that applies to all of them, right? All of the Christmas characters, if we describe it like that. And of course, it was intended to be shattering for Rome as well, because when Mary has her time to sing her little song called the Magnificat, from the Latin, "My soul doth magnify the Lord," it's an earth-shattering song. She said that because of what God has done in her, um, everyone is going to regard me as blessed, which is a huge, sort of upheaval. And then the other part of that is that it's going to be a change for society. She said those who've essentially been the recipients of all of the good things and the power and the material resources are now going to experience something different. And those who've been empty are finally going to have some experience of fullness. That was her dream at the time. And I think part of what I love about John Shea's comment, he says that, an invitation comes to us through this story, which is ambiguous. We have to figure it out. And it doesn't resolve all of the problems that the world faces all at once, right? Mary and Joseph are refugees, and there are still millions of refugees and evacuees across the world. So here we are 2,000 years later, still working this story through. And I'm so glad that we celebrate it in the way that we do. We tell it in the most imaginative way that we can. But now, of course, the challenge is to live it. Every year, as he says, it's an invitation. And how shall we pick up that invitation and express that in our lives? It's such an amazing thing to have this gesture made towards us through this story.
It's so interesting, too, because, Christmas comes every 12 months.
Right. Yep.
And sometimes it feels like it's every 6 months with how we celebrate it as society and whatnot. But, we have these stories that we revisit every year, the Christmas stories and then the Lent and Holy Week and Easter stories. And it's so interesting because I feel like we're always finding something new in them. We're connecting to them in new ways. And it's not because the stories are changing, but I think it's as we're changing and we're learning and growing, hopefully, that we're finding in them new layers that we can continually learn from and I think be challenged by, to be more loving, more open, and be the innkeeper in the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
I always feel like the innkeeper is that unsung hero,
Right? At least it's a place. It's not no place.
Yeah. He tries best. He tries best.
Exactly.
Talk about another character who's relatable. It's like, guys, I tried.
What can I say? I was full up. There was no vacancy. I had the sign outside, and lo and behold,
just a guy trying to make a living here.
Right? I think there could be a whole sermon series, really, which is they did their best. Right? There's a lot of those characters.
How people say, like, I want that on my tombstone. I want that on my tombstone. She did her best. She tried her best. That's all. I can think of no better. Because it is both optimistic, but also super realistic. Like, what? Right. She tried. Didn't always succeed. She tried.
When I think of these characters, and what they wind up trying to do with their lives, I know that I've told you this story before. We may have even told it on the podcast, but some years ago I was talking with a woman who said that, when she started having children, she realized, oh my gosh, what kind of a world am I in? How am I going to do this? And somebody gave her a book by, I think it's an Austrian psychologist. His name is Bruno Bettelheim, and he wrote a book called A Good Enough Parent. And she said, I bought it, put it on my nightstand, and never read it. But it just reminded me every day, be good enough.
It's so great.
It's a good standard. And I think that the characters in these stories, maybe that's the way to look at them, is that they were at a certain level, but they actually got up to another level that was good enough to do what needed to be done in that moment. And so they're not impossibly good. They're not at that level, but they did what needed to be done. They took care of the child. When they needed to run, they ran. When it was time to come back home, they came back home. And it's interesting because we don't have almost any stories about Jesus, right, as a child, other than these nativity stories. We have one story about him as an adolescent, when he gets lost for a day, and parents have to go back and find him because they've misplaced him for a while. But again, all very human and realizable. And it just, again, it's that God chooses to work within the limitations of human life. And that may perplex us. It may anger us, because we'd rather at times that God didn't, that God worked above and through. But the choice here over and over is to work through humanity, to work through what it means to be human, which is actually an incredible gesture of confidence towards human beings and humanity. Right. So all of that, I think, comes through this Christmas story as well.
And that expectation that we be better than our basest selves. This idea that God working through us means that we have the ability to do wonders, to do amazing things for each other and for our world and for our planet. And that, though sometimes it feels like humanity is pretty crummy, frankly, at least to me. I think it's interesting that as the clay, we could be so many different things. We have potential.
Yes.
Live into it.
Yeah. And I think my takeaway from our wonderful pageant and from this time of the year is that, we can hear the story, but it can just kind of cycle through and not catch us very much. But to really stop, say, wait a second, I'm going to really read this story. I'm going to listen to it. I think I already know it. I think I already know what it's going to say. To try to suspend that for a little while and really listen to what's going on there. It's a story, as John Shea says, that can calm our terrors and help us to hold our hope on high. And that, I think, is my great hope for Christmas. And I'm gonna listen to the story very carefully this year.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for this conversation, Ed. And this is, I believe, our last podcast for 2023.
Yes. Wow.
And we will be back on, as she quickly checks her calendar. I can tell you, everybody. We will be back on January 9th.
Great.
With all new episodes. We're so grateful to each of you for joining us for these conversations. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the year, a beautiful celebration of your holiday season, and some good time to rest. And we will do some resting and with our families and be back with you. So thank you all so much, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Roundhill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Roundhill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillradio.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, there are a few things that you can do that would make a big difference to us. Like the video, subscribe if you aren't, and click the notification bell and select all. Thank you.